The morning of April 9th, 2021, brought an unusual stillness to Windsor Castle. Queen Elizabeth II stood at her bedroom window, looking out at the grounds where she had walked with Prince Philip for decades. The man who had been her husband for 73 years, her constant companion, and her strength was gone. Today, she would lay him to rest, and the weight of that responsibility pressed heavily on her shoulders. The Queen had been awake since before dawn, as was her habit, but today felt different. The castle staff moved quietly through the corridors, their footsteps muffled on the ancient carpets. Everyone understood the gravity of the day ahead. Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh, had died just 8 days earlier at the age of 99, and now the woman who had ruled Britain for nearly 70 years faced one of the most challenging days of her long life. Angela Kelly, the Queen's personal dresser and closest confidant, entered the royal bedroom carrying a carefully pressed black dress. The two women had worked together for decades, and Angela understood without words what this day meant to her employer. The Queen rarely showed emotion publicly, but Angela could see the subtle signs of grief in the way Her Majesty's hands trembled slightly as she reached for her pearl necklace. The dress chosen for the funeral was significant. It was a simple black coat dress with a white collar, elegant but not ostentatious. The Queen had worn it before to other solemn occasions, and it represented the understated dignity that had defined her reign. Every detail of her appearance today would be scrutinized by millions of people around the world, but more importantly, it needed to honor Philip's memory while maintaining the dignity of the monarchy. As the Queen prepared for the day ahead, she reflected on the conversations she had held with her private secretary, Sir Edward Young, over the past week. The funeral arrangements had been complicated by the ongoing pandemic, which meant that many of the traditional elements of a royal funeral had to be modified or eliminated entirely. The guest list, which might normally have included 800 people, was reduced to just 30 family members. The Queen had made difficult decisions about who could attend, knowing that many people who loved Philip would have to watch from home. The most painful aspect of the planning had been the seating arrangements. Due to social distancing requirements, the Queen would have to sit alone during the service. She would not have the comfort of holding someone's hand or having a family member beside her for support. Military personnel were taking their positions, and the specially modified Land Rover that would carry Philip's coffin was being given its final inspection. The Land Rover held special significance for both Philip and the Queen. It had been designed by Philip himself over 16 years earlier, when he had begun planning his own funeral. He had worked closely with the manufacturers to create a vehicle that reflected his practical nature and his love of engineering. The dark green color matched his military associations, and the open-top design meant that his coffin would be visible to those who lined the route. The Queen had approved every detail of his design, knowing how important it had been to him to have control over his final journey. By mid-morning, the Queen was dressed and ready to review the final arrangements. She walked slowly through the castle corridors, her black heels clicking softly on the stone floors. The portraits of her ancestors seemed to watch as she passed, reminding her of the centuries of tradition that she represented. Today, she would add another chapter to that long history, conducting herself with the same dignity that had sustained the monarchy through wars, scandals, and personal tragedies. In her private study, the Queen met with the Dean of Windsor, who would conduct the funeral service. They had worked together many times over the years, and he understood the delicate balance between the public nature of the event and the intensely personal loss that the Queen was experiencing. They discussed the hymns that Philip had chosen, the readings that would be delivered by his children, and the moment when his coffin would be lowered into the royal vault beneath St. George's Chapel. The Dean gently asked if the Queen had any final requests or changes she wanted to make to the service. She considered his question carefully before shaking her head. Philip had been very specific about what he wanted, and she was determined to honor his wishes exactly. He had chosen hymns that reflected his naval career and his love of the sea. He had selected readings that spoke to his deep faith and his commitment to service. Even the music would reflect his preferences, with pieces chosen to avoid excessive sentimentality. As the mourning continued, members of the royal family began arriving at Windsor Castle. The Queen greeted each of them personally, offering quiet words of comfort and ensuring that they understood their roles in the ceremony. Her children had been her primary support during the past week, and she drew strength from their presence. Prince Charles, in particular, had been invaluable in helping with the practical arrangements, while also supporting his mother emotionally. The Queen also met briefly with her grandchildren, including Prince William and Prince Harry, who had flown in from California for the funeral. The brothers had been estranged for months, and their reunion added another layer of complexity to an already emotional day. The Queen spoke to them both about the importance of honoring their grandfather's memory and setting aside personal differences, at least for this one day. She reminded them that Philip would have wanted the family to come together, not to allow his funeral to become a source of further division. The logistics of the day were overseen by the Lord Chamberlain's office, which had years of experience in planning royal ceremonies. However, the pandemic had created unprecedented challenges. Every person attending the funeral had to be tested for coronavirus, and detailed seating plans had been drawn up to ensure proper social distancing. The Queen had followed all of these protocols herself, understanding that she could not ask others to follow rules that she was not willing to observe. The media attention surrounding the funeral was intense, even by royal standards. News crews from around the world had gathered in Windsor, and millions of people were expected to watch the ceremony on television. The Queen was acutely aware that this event would be one of the most watched moments of her reign, and she felt the responsibility of presenting the monarchy with dignity while also honoring her husband's legacy. As noon approached, the Queen took a final moment alone in her private chapel. She had always been a woman of deep faith, and prayer had sustained her through many difficult times during her reign. Today, she prayed for strength to get through the ceremony with grace, for her family to find comfort in their shared grief, and for Philip to rest in peace. The small chapel had been a place of solitude for her throughout their marriage, and being there helped her feel connected to the traditions that had always guided her. The sound of the castle's bells began to toll, marking the beginning of the formal ceremonies. The Queen knew that in a few minutes she would have to leave her private quarters and take her place as the sovereign, conducting a state funeral with the eyes of the world upon her. But for now, she allowed herself a few more seconds of quiet reflection. She thought about the early days of their marriage, when Philip had given up his naval career to support her unexpected ascension to the throne. She remembered their wedding day in 1947, when Britain was still recovering from the war and their marriage had provided hope for a brighter future. She recalled the births of their children, the countless state functions they had attended together, and the private moments that had sustained their relationship through decades of public scrutiny. The Queen also thought about Philip's final years, when his health had begun to decline, but his spirit remained strong. Even as he approached his 100th birthday, he had continued to show interest in current events, in their family, and in the future of the monarchy. His death had come peacefully at Windsor Castle, the place where they had been happiest together, and she found some comfort in knowing that his suffering had been brief. A gentle knock on the chapel door indicated that it was time for her to join the formal procession. The Queen rose from her kneeling position, straightened her dress, and took a deep breath. In a few moments, she would step out into the courtyard where the military honor guard was waiting. The coffin containing her husband's body was already in place on the Land Rover he had designed, covered with his personal standard, his naval cap, and his sword. The transformation from grieving widow to reigning monarch was something the Queen had perfected over her long reign. As she walked toward the door, her posture straightened, and her expression became the composed mask that the public expected to see. She would carry herself with the dignity that the moment required, while inside she dealt with the overwhelming sadness of saying goodbye to the person who had known her better than anyone else in the world. The Queen's final preparation involved checking that she had the small personal items that would comfort her during the ceremony. In her handbag, she carried a handkerchief that Philip had given her years earlier, a small photograph of the two of them from their honeymoon, and the simple gold wedding ring that he had placed on her finger 73 years ago. These private talismans would help her maintain her composure during the most difficult moments of the service. As she prepared to leave her private quarters for the last time as a married woman, the Queen looked once more at the photographs that covered her dressing table. Pictures of Philip in his naval uniform, images of their children as babies, photographs from state visits around the world, all documented a life shared in service to their country and to each other. Today, that chapter would close, but the memories captured in those photographs would remain with her forever. The courtyard of Windsor Castle filled with the measured sounds of military precision as the Queen emerged from the castle's main entrance. The household cavalry stood at attention, their uniforms immaculate despite the cool April morning. The sight that greeted her was both magnificent and heartbreaking. Philip's coffin rested on the specially designed Land Rover, draped with his personal standard and adorned with the symbols of his long life of service. The Queen took her position behind the vehicle, maintaining the composure that had defined her public persona for nearly 7 decades. Her black coat moved gently in the spring breeze, and the 3-strand pearl necklace at her throat caught the morning light. These pearls had been a wedding gift from her father, King George VI, and wearing them today connected her to the long chain of royal tradition that she represented. Every detail of her appearance had been carefully considered, from the black patent leather handbag that matched her shoes to the simple gold brooch that Philip had given her during their engagement. The procession that formed behind the Land Rover represented the key figures in Philip's life and the institutions he had served. Prince Charles walked immediately behind his father's coffin, his military uniform reflecting his own years of service. Behind him came Prince William and Prince Harry, temporarily setting aside their personal differences to honor their grandfather. The sight of the two brothers walking together provided a moment of hope for those who had watched their relationship deteriorate over the past year. Princess and Philip's only daughter walked with quiet dignity in her military uniform. She had perhaps been closest to her father among all the children, sharing his love of horses and his practical approach to life. Her presence in the procession honored not only her role as his daughter, but also her position as one of the hardest-working members of the royal family, something that Philip had always deeply respected. The Queen watched as the procession slowly moved forward, the rhythm set by the military band that led the way. The music was solemn but not mournful, reflecting Philip's own wishes for a ceremony that celebrated his life rather than dwelling on death. The steady beat of the drums provided a heartbeat for the entire ceremony, keeping everyone moving at the proper pace towards St. George's Chapel. As they walked through the castle grounds, the Queen was surrounded by reminders of the life she had shared with Philip. They passed the gardens where he had spent countless hours designing landscapes and experimenting with new plants. They walked by the stables where he had kept his horses and where he had taught their children to ride. Every corner of Windsor held memories of their shared life, and today those memories felt both comforting and painful. The route to the chapel was lined with military personnel representing the many organizations that Philip had served during his long life. The Royal Navy was prominently represented, reflecting his early career as a naval officer and his continuing connection to the sea throughout his life. Representatives from the Army and Royal Air Force also stood at attention, acknowledging his role as Captain General of the Royal Marines and his patronage of numerous military organizations. The Queen noticed the faces of the castle staff who had been given permission to line the route. Many of these people had worked with Philip for decades, and their presence provided a personal touch to what might otherwise have been entirely formal and institutional. She recognized gardeners who had worked with Philip on his beloved landscaping projects, grooms who had cared for his horses, and household staff who had served the royal family with quiet dedication for years. The pace of the procession was deliberately slow, allowing time for reflection and ensuring that the ceremony maintained its dignity. The Queen used these moments to gather her strength for the service ahead. She knew that once they reached the chapel, she would have to endure the most difficult part of the day, sitting alone while listening to tributes to the man who had been her companion for most of her life. The sound of church bells filled the air, not just from St. George's Chapel, but from churches throughout Britain and across the Commonwealth. This coordinated ringing had been planned as a tribute to Philip's international influence and his role in connecting Britain with its former colonies. The Queen found comfort in knowing that people around the world were marking this moment with her, even if they could not be physically present due to the pandemic restrictions. As they approached the chapel, the Queen could see the carefully arranged seating that had been set up to accommodate the limited number of guests. Each seat was positioned to maintain social distancing requirements, which meant that families had to sit separately from each other. This arrangement was particularly difficult for the Queen, who would have normally been accompanied by other senior members of the royal family during such an important ceremony. The ancient stones of St. George's Chapel had witnessed countless royal ceremonies over the centuries. This was where the Queen and Philip had celebrated their diamond wedding anniversary in 2007, where Prince Harry and Meghan Markle had been married just 3 years earlier, and where Princess Eugenie had wed in 2018. Today, those happy memories seemed to echo in the chapel's walls, providing a bittersweet backdrop to the farewell ceremony. The Queen took her designated seat in the choir of the chapel, positioned where she could see Philip's coffin clearly, but separated from her family by the pandemic protocols. The isolation she felt at this moment was perhaps the most difficult aspect of the entire day. Throughout their marriage, Philip had been her constant support during public ceremonies, often providing silent encouragement with a look or a subtle gesture. Now she faced this ultimate public ceremony without that comfort. The service began with the careful precision that characterized all royal ceremonies. The Dean of Windsor, David Connor, had worked closely with the Queen and the royal family to create a service that honored Philip's wishes while providing comfort to those who mourned him. The opening prayers acknowledged both his public service and his role as a husband, father, and grandfather. The first hymn, Eternal Father, Strong to Save, reflected Philip's lifelong connection to the Royal Navy. The Queen sang along with the congregation, her voice joining with those of her children and grandchildren in words that had special meaning for a man who had spent his early career at sea. The hymn's references to protecting those in peril on the ocean seemed particularly appropriate for someone who had served his country with courage during World War II. During the service, the Queen listened to readings chosen by Philip himself before his death. These passages from the Bible reflected his deep faith and his belief in the importance of service to others. The words spoke of duty, sacrifice, and the hope of eternal life, themes that had guided Philip's own approach to his royal role and his personal relationships. Prince Charles delivered a reading from the Gospel of John, his voice steady despite the emotion of the moment. The passage he read spoke of Jesus preparing a place for his disciples in his Father's house, offering comfort to those who faced the loss of a loved one. The Queen watched her eldest son with pride, knowing how difficult it was for him to speak publicly about his father while managing his own grief. The Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, delivered a brief address that focused on Philip's character and his contributions to British life. He spoke about Philip's curiosity, his commitment to young people through the Duke of Edinburgh's award scheme, and his support for the Queen throughout her long reign. The Archbishop's words painted a picture of a man who had lived with purpose and who had made a lasting difference in the lives of countless people. Throughout the service, the Queen maintained her composure while processing the reality that this was her final goodbye to the man who had shared her life for more than 7 decades. She thought about their private conversations, their shared jokes, and the way Philip had always been able to make her laugh even during the most stressful times. Those private moments felt especially precious now that they could never be repeated. The music during the service included pieces that Philip had specifically requested, including compositions that reflected his love of classical music and his appreciation for British composers. The chapel's choir performed with exceptional beauty, their voices filling the ancient space with harmonies that seemed to lift the words of prayer and praise toward heaven. The Queen had always found comfort in music, and today, the carefully chosen pieces provided a soundtrack for her memories of Philip. As the service progressed toward its conclusion, the Queen prepared herself for the moment when Philip's coffin would be lowered into the royal vault beneath the chapel. This would not be his final resting place. Eventually, when her own time came, they would be buried together in the smaller King George VI Memorial Chapel. But, for now, this would be where his earthly remains would rest. The final prayers of the service included intercessions for the royal family, for the Commonwealth, and for all those who mourned Philip's passing. The Queen joined in these prayers, finding strength in the shared faith that had sustained her throughout her reign. She prayed for her family, knowing that they would all need to support each other through the difficult days ahead. The last post sounded through the chapel, played by a single bugler whose clear notes seemed to hang in the air long after the music ended. This traditional military tribute acknowledged Philip's service to his country and marked the formal conclusion of his life of duty. The Queen had heard the last post countless times during her reign, but never before had it carried such personal significance. As the service concluded, the Queen remained seated while the rest of the congregation began to file out of the chapel. This moment of solitude, while difficult, gave her a chance to say her own private goodbye to Philip before returning to her public role. She would need to greet the guests who had attended, thank the clergy and military personnel who had participated, and begin the process of moving forward without her lifelong companion. The moment had arrived for the most difficult part of the ceremony. The Queen watched as the pallbearers approached Philip's coffin, their movements precise and respectful. These were not strangers, but members of his own household staff, men who had served him personally for years and who understood the weight of this final duty. The sight of them preparing to carry her husband to his resting place brought the reality of the situation into sharp focus. The committal service began with simple dignity. The Queen stood as Philip's coffin was slowly lowered into the royal vault beneath St. George's Chapel. The mechanism that lowered the coffin had been tested repeatedly to ensure that this moment would proceed without any technical problems. Even in death, Philip would have appreciated the engineering precision that made the process seamless and dignified. As the coffin disappeared from view, the Queen experienced a profound moment of finality. This was the physical separation that marked the end of their earthly partnership. Her hands, clasped in front of her, trembled slightly, but her expression remained composed. She had learned over decades of public service how to maintain her dignity even during the most personally challenging moments. The Dean of Windsor spoke the traditional words of committal. "We therefore commit his body to the ground, earth to earth, ashes to ashes, dust to dust, in the sure and certain hope of the resurrection to eternal life." These ancient words have been spoken over countless royal burials throughout British history, connecting Philip's death to the long tradition of monarchy that he had served so faithfully. Prince Charles stepped forward to place earth on his father's coffin, followed by the other senior members of the royal family. This symbolic act represented their final goodbye and their acceptance that Philip's earthly life had ended. The Queen watched each of her children and grandchildren perform this ritual, seeing in their faces reflections of her own grief and loss. When it came time for the Queen herself to participate in this final ceremony, she moved slowly to the edge of the vault. Her black-gloved hand released a small amount of earth onto the coffin below, and with that gesture, she formally said goodbye to the man who had been her strength and support for most of her life. The symbolism of that moment, earth to earth, dust to dust, reminded her of the temporary nature of all earthly relationships and the hope of reunion in eternity. The private committal service lasted only a few minutes, but for the Queen, those minutes seemed to stretch into hours. Each element of the ceremony carried deep meaning, from the final prayers to the moment when the vault was sealed. She knew that this small gathering of family members was the last time they would all be together in Philip's presence, and she tried to memorize every detail of the scene. Following the committal, the royal family began the slow process of leaving the chapel. The Queen was among the last to depart, taking a final moment to look around the space where she and Philip had worshipped together for so many years. The chapel held countless memories of happier occasions. Christmas services, weddings, and celebrations that had marked the milestones of their shared life. The walk back to Windsor Castle was markedly different from the formal procession that had brought them to the chapel. Now the ceremony was complete, and the family members walked together in small groups, offering each other comfort and support. The Queen walked slowly, supported by the knowledge that Philip would have been proud of how the day had proceeded according to his wishes. Back at the castle, the Queen faced the challenge of returning to normal life after such an extraordinary day. The guests who had attended the funeral were invited for a small reception, where they could share memories of Philip and offer their condolences to the royal family. The Queen moved through this gathering with grace, personally thanking each person for their presence and their support during this difficult time. Many of the guests had known Philip for decades, and their stories provided comfort to the Queen. Naval colleagues spoke about his dedication and professionalism during his military service. Representatives from the many charities he had supported shared examples of his practical approach to solving problems and helping others. These testimonials painted a picture of a man whose influence extended far beyond his royal duties. The conversation with Philip's former private secretary was particularly meaningful. This man had worked closely with Philip for more than 20 years and could share insights about his character that few people had witnessed. He told the Queen about Philip's meticulous attention to detail, his genuine interest in the people he met during official engagements, and his constant concern for her well-being throughout their shared public life. Princess Anne spent considerable time with her mother during the reception, providing the kind of practical support that Philip himself might have offered, and had inherited many of her father's characteristics, his directness, his efficiency, and his commitment to duty, and she understood better than most what the Queen needed during this transition period. Their conversation touched on the immediate practical matters that would need attention in the coming days. Prince William and Prince Harry both made efforts to spend time with their grandmother, setting aside their personal differences to provide comfort during her time of grief. The Queen had always been close to both of her grandsons, and their presence reminded her that Philip's legacy would continue through the next generation. She spoke to them about their grandfather's pride in their own service and his hopes for their future contributions to the monarchy and to society. The reception also provided an opportunity for the Queen to thank the many people who had made the funeral ceremony possible. She spoke personally with the Dean of Windsor, praising his sensitive handling of the service and his understanding of what Philip would have wanted. She thanked the military personnel who had participated in the ceremony, acknowledging their precision and dignity during every aspect of the proceedings. The Archbishop of Canterbury received special thanks for his address during the service. The Queen told him how accurately he had captured Philip's character and how much comfort his words had provided to the family. The Archbishop shared his own memories of conversations with Philip, describing a man of deep faith who was also intensely practical in his approach to solving problems. As the afternoon progressed, the Queen began to experience the exhaustion that comes after intense emotional strain. The adrenaline that had sustained her through the morning ceremony was beginning to fade, and she felt the full weight of her loss settling over her. The castle staff, who understood her needs after years of service, quietly began to manage the departure of the guests so that she could have some private time to rest. The Queen's lady-in-waiting, Susan Hussey, had been a constant but discreet presence throughout the day. Lady Susan had served the royal family for more than 50 years and understood better than most how to provide support without intruding on private grief. She ensured that the Queen had everything she needed while allowing her the space to process the emotions of the day. The photographs taken during the funeral would become some of the most iconic images of the Queen's reign. The picture of her sitting alone in St. George's Chapel, separated from her family by pandemic protocols, captured the isolation that many people had experienced during the previous year. Her solitary figure in black, maintaining her dignity despite her obvious grief, became a symbol of resilience and duty that resonated with people around the world. As evening approached, the Queen retreated to her private apartments for the first time as a widow. The silence in her rooms felt different now, heavier and more profound than it had during Philip's brief absences for medical treatment. She realized that this silence would be her new reality, and the thought was almost overwhelming. Her dinner was served in her private dining room, where she and Philip had shared countless meals over the years. The table, set for one, served as a stark reminder of how fundamentally her daily life would change. The conversations that had accompanied their meals, the shared observations about the day's events, the comfortable silences that come with long marriage, all of these were now part of the past. The Queen spent some time that evening going through the personal items that Philip had left in their shared living spaces. His reading glasses on the bedside table, the book he had been reading when he became ill, the notebooks where he had recorded his thoughts about various projects. These ordinary objects now carried extraordinary emotional weight. Among his papers, she found notes he had written about the funeral arrangements, including specific instructions about music, flowers, and the guest list. Even in these final details, she could see evidence of the thoughtfulness and consideration that had characterized their relationship. He had tried to make even his own funeral as easy as possible for her to manage. The day had been a success in the sense that everything had proceeded according to plan, but for the Queen, its conclusion marked the beginning of a new and uncertain chapter of her life. She had been married longer than she had been single, and the prospect of continuing her royal duties without Philip's support seemed daunting. However, she also understood that carrying on was exactly what he would have expected her to do. Before retiring for the night, the Queen spent a few minutes in her private chapel, offering prayers of gratitude for Philip's life and for the strength that had carried her through the day. She prayed for her family as they dealt with their own grief, and she asked for continued guidance as she faced the challenges ahead. The familiar ritual of prayer provided comfort and helped her find peace as this extraordinary day came to an end. The days following Philip's funeral brought a strange mixture of relief and deeper sadness for the Queen. The immediate pressure of organizing and enduring the ceremony was over, but now she faced the reality of beginning life without her husband's daily presence. The castle, which had seemed too quiet during his final illness, now felt almost hollow without the possibility of his return. The Queen's first priority was responding to the thousands of messages of condolence that had poured in from around the world. Letters arrived from heads of state, ordinary citizens, military personnel who had served with Philip, and beneficiaries of the charities he had supported. Each message represented someone whose life had been touched by Philip's service, and the Queen felt obligated to acknowledge as many as possible personally. Reading through these tributes provided unexpected comfort. A letter from a young person who had completed the Duke of Edinburgh Award described how the program had given him confidence and direction in life. A note from a former naval officer recalled Philip's leadership during dangerous wartime missions. Messages from Commonwealth leaders spoke about his role in strengthening relationships between Britain and its former colonies. These testimonies painted a picture of a life well lived and a legacy that would endure. The practical aspects of adjusting to widowhood presented unexpected challenges. For more than 70 years, the Queen's daily routine had been shaped around Philip's presence and preferences. Mealtimes, travel arrangements, social schedules, and even television viewing had all been coordinated to accommodate both of their needs. Now, for the first time since her early 20s, she had to recreate her personal routines around her own preferences alone. Her private secretary worked with her to review her upcoming engagements and determine which ones might need to be modified or canceled. The Queen was determined to continue her royal duties, but she recognized that some events might be too emotionally difficult in the immediate aftermath of Philip's death. State dinners, for example, would feel particularly strange without Philip's presence, as he had been her partner at such events for decades. The Queen also needed to make decisions about Philip's personal belongings. His clothes, his books, his correspondence, and the countless items he had collected over his long life all needed to be sorted and distributed. Some items would go to family members as keepsakes, others would be donated to museums or charities, and some would simply need to be disposed of. This process was emotionally exhausting, as each item carried memories of their shared life. His library was particularly difficult to address. Philip had been a voracious reader with interests that ranged from engineering and technology to philosophy and religion. The books on his shelves contained his handwritten notes and observations, creating a record of his intellectual curiosity and his evolving thoughts on various subjects. The Queen spent hours going through these volumes, reading his marginalia and remembering conversations they had shared about the ideas contained in the books. The Queen's children provided crucial support during this transition period. Prince Charles visited regularly, often staying for dinner and helping his mother process the emotional and practical challenges she faced. Princess Anne, with her characteristic efficiency, helped organize the distribution of Philip's belongings and managed many of the administrative details that needed attention. Prince Andrew and Prince Edward also made efforts to spend more time with their mother, understanding that her need for family support was greater now than it had been in many years. These visits often involved looking through family photographs and sharing memories of Philip, which helped the Queen maintain a connection to the happier times they had shared together. The royal staff at Windsor Castle played an important role in helping the Queen adjust to her new circumstances. Many of these people had worked with Philip for years and understood how his absence would affect the daily rhythms of castle life. They quietly modified routines to accommodate the Queen's changing needs while maintaining the efficiency and dignity that royal operations required. The head gardener brought the Queen regular updates about Philip's landscaping projects, which were continuing according to his detailed plans. Philip had been deeply involved in designing the gardens at Windsor and had left specific instructions for ongoing maintenance and improvements. Seeing these projects continue provided the Queen with a sense of continuity and a way to honor his memory through the beautiful spaces he had created. The Queen also received regular briefings about the Duke of Edinburgh War Program, which Philip had founded and which would continue as his most visible legacy. The program coordinators shared statistics about the young people who were currently participating and stories about recent achievements. Knowing that thousands of young people around the world were still benefiting from Philip's vision provided comfort and pride. International reaction to Philip's death and funeral continued to arrive in the weeks following the ceremony. Many countries had organized their own memorial services or moments of silence to honor his memory. The Queen received detailed reports about these tributes, which demonstrated the global respect that Philip had earned through his decades of service. The Commonwealth countries, in particular, had been deeply affected by Philip's death. He had visited most of these nations multiple times and had developed relationships with their leaders and citizens. The Queen read accounts of memorial services in Australia, Canada, New Zealand, and other Commonwealth realms, feeling grateful for the international recognition of Philip's contributions. Media coverage of the funeral had been overwhelmingly positive, with commentators praising both the dignity of the ceremony and the Queen's composure throughout the difficult day. The image of her sitting alone in St. George's Chapel had become iconic, representing not only her personal loss, but also the sacrifices that many people had made during the pandemic. This symbolic power provided some consolation for the painful isolation she had experienced during the service. The Queen began to establish new daily routines that acknowledged Philip's absence while maintaining her commitment to her royal duties. Her morning briefings with her private secretary were now longer, as she took more direct involvement in decisions that Philip might previously have influenced. She also began to schedule more time for personal correspondence, finding comfort in the written connections with people around the world. Television viewing became a solitary activity for the first time in decades. Philip had often chosen what they watched together, and his running commentary on news programs and documentaries had been a source of both information and entertainment. Now the Queen had to decide for herself what to watch, and the silence in the room during these evening programs felt overwhelming. The Queen's relationship with her corgis became even more important during this period of adjustment. These dogs had always been a source of comfort and companionship, but Now they provided continuity in daily routines that had otherwise been disrupted. Their need for regular walks and feeding created structure in days that might otherwise have felt aimless. Walking through the gardens at Windsor became a daily ritual that helped the Queen maintain her physical and emotional health. These walks often took her past places where she and Philip had spent time together. The rose garden they had planted for their silver wedding anniversary, the tree they had planted to commemorate Prince Charles's birth, the bench where they had often sat together in the evenings. The Queen also began to spend more time with her horses, another passion that she and Philip had shared. The breeding program at the Royal Stud Farms continued, and the Queen found comfort in making decisions about which horses to race and which to retire to breeding. Philip had always been interested in these decisions, and continuing to make them helped her feel connected to his ongoing influence. Letters from her grandchildren provided particular comfort during this period. Prince William wrote thoughtfully about his memories of his grandfather and his commitment to carrying forward Philip's legacy through his own royal duties. Prince Harry's letter from California expressed his gratitude for Philip's influence on his life and his regret that his children would not have the opportunity to know their great-grandfather well. The Queen's great-grandchildren also provided joy during this difficult time. Their innocence and energy reminded her that life continues and that Philip's influence would extend to future generations through the family values he had helped establish. Prince George and Princess Charlotte, in particular, had been close to their great-grandfather and would carry forward memories of his stories and his attention to their interests. As spring progressed into summer, the Queen began to feel more settled in her new routines, though the sadness of Philip's absence remained constant. She understood that grief was not something to be overcome quickly, but rather something to be lived with and integrated into ongoing life. Her faith provided guidance for this process, reminding her that love transcends death and that the bonds formed during marriage continue even after physical separation. By the time summer arrived at Windsor Castle, the Queen had developed new rhythms of life that honored Philip's memory while allowing her to continue her royal duties with renewed purpose. The garden paths she walked daily had become familiar again, though she still noticed his absence in every corner where they had once strolled together. The roses he had planted were blooming magnificently, a living testament to his continuing influence on the castle grounds. The Queen's approach to her official duties evolved during these months following the funeral. She became more selective about her public appearances, choosing engagements that held particular meaning or that connected to causes Philip had championed. Her first major public event after the funeral was a visit to a youth program that operated under the Duke of Edinburgh Award scheme, where she met young people whose lives had been transformed by Philip's vision. During that visit, the Queen listened to stories from award participants who described how the program had taught them leadership skills, built their confidence, and introduced them to career opportunities they had never imagined. One young woman explained how completing her Duke of Edinburgh Gold Award had led to a scholarship opportunity and eventually to a career in environmental science. These conversations reminded the Queen of why Philip had been so passionate about creating opportunities for young people to discover their potential. The Queen also made the decision to take on some of Philip's patronages personally, ensuring that organizations he had supported would continue to receive royal attention. This included military associations, engineering societies, and conservation groups that had benefited from his expertise and enthusiasm. By accepting these additional responsibilities, she found a way to honor his memory while continuing the work that had been important to him. The process of creating a permanent memorial to Philip became an important focus for the Queen during this period. Working with architects and designers, she developed plans for a garden memorial at Windsor Castle that would reflect his love of nature and his commitment to conservation. The memorial would include native plants that supported wildlife, reflecting Philip's environmental interests and his belief in sustainable land management. The Queen's correspondence during this time revealed her growing comfort with her role as Philip's chief commemorator and the guardian of his legacy. She wrote personally to organizations around the world that were establishing their own memorials to Philip, offering her support and sharing insights about what he would have found meaningful. These letters helped her maintain connections with the global network of people and institutions that Philip had influenced during his long career. Family gatherings took on new significance as the Queen worked to ensure that Philip's grandchildren and great-grandchildren would remember him accurately and appreciate his contributions to their family and their country. She organized regular dinners where family members could share stories about Philip, creating an oral history that would preserve his memory for future generations. During these family conversations, the Queen learned new details about Philip's relationships with her children and grandchildren. Prince Charles spoke about advice his father had given him about balancing personal desires with royal duty. Princess Anne shared memories of working alongside Philip on equestrian projects and learning from his practical approach to problem-solving. These stories revealed aspects of Philip's character that the Queen had not fully appreciated, deepening her understanding of the man she had lived with for so many years. The Queen's great-grandchildren provided unexpected moments of joy and connection to Philip's memory. Prince George, who had been old enough to remember his great-grandfather well, often asked questions about Philip's naval career and his interest in technology. Princess Charlotte had inherited some of Philip's directness and curiosity, traits that reminded the Queen of her husband's influence on the newest generation of the royal family. The autumn following Philip's death brought new challenges as the Queen faced their first wedding anniversary without him. October 20th had been a day of celebration for 73 years, and its approach filled her with dread. However, with the support of her family and staff, she decided to mark the day by visiting places that had been significant in their relationship, turning what could have been a day of pure sadness into an opportunity for grateful remembrance. The Queen visited Westminster Abbey, where their wedding had taken place in 1947, spending time in private prayer and reflection in the space where their marriage had begun. She also went to Broadlands, the estate where they had spent part of their honeymoon, walking through gardens that looked much as they had in 1947. These visits allowed her to reconnect with the joy and hope that had characterized the beginning of their marriage. The Christmas season presented another emotional challenge, as this had always been a time when the royal family gathered together and when Philip's presence had been especially meaningful. The Queen made the difficult decision to spend Christmas at Windsor Castle rather than at Sandringham, feeling that the familiar surroundings would provide more comfort during this first holiday season without Philip. The Queen's Christmas broadcast that year included a tribute to Philip that she had written personally, drawing on her own memories rather than relying entirely on speechwriters. She spoke about his service to the country, his support for her throughout their marriage, and his influence on their family. The broadcast was deeply personal while maintaining the dignity and objectivity that her public role required. International recognition of Philip's legacy continued to arrive throughout the year following his death. Universities announced scholarships in his name, scientific research stations were dedicated to his memory, and conservation projects were established to honor his environmental interests. The Queen took pride in these tributes while also feeling the weight of responsibility to ensure that his memory was honored accurately and meaningfully. The Queen's own health became a concern for her family and staff during this period of adjustment. The stress of grief, combined with her advanced age, required careful management of her schedule and activities. However, she resisted suggestions that she should reduce her royal duties significantly, arguing that continuing to serve was the best way to honor Philip's memory and maintain her own sense of purpose. The Duke of Edinburgh Award Program underwent expansion during this period, as increased public interest following Philip's death led to greater participation and support. The Queen took personal interest in these developments, reviewing plans for new programs and meeting with young people who had been inspired to participate because of Philip's example. This growth in the program he had founded provided tangible evidence that his influence would continue to expand even after his death. The Queen's relationship with the Commonwealth evolved during this period as well, as she took on responsibilities that Philip had previously shared. Her conversations with Commonwealth leaders increasingly included references to Philip's contributions to strengthening relationships between Britain and these nations. These discussions helped her maintain connections that Philip had built over decades of travel and engagement. By the end of the first year following Philip's death, the Queen had established a new equilibrium that honored his memory while allowing her to continue serving as monarch with dignity and purpose. The grief remained, but it had been integrated into a life that still held meaning and responsibility. She had learned to live with loss while maintaining her commitment to the people and institutions she served. The Queen's example during this period of adjustment became a source of inspiration for many other people dealing with loss and grief. Her ability to continue working while processing deep personal sadness demonstrated the possibility of finding meaning and purpose even in the midst of profound loss. The dignity with which she handled her transition from wife to widow provided a model of grace under pressure that resonated with people around the world. As she looked toward the future, the Queen understood that her remaining years would be shaped by Philip's continuing influence on her decisions and priorities. The values he had embodied, duty, service, practical problem-solving, and commitment to family, would guide her choices as she continued to serve as monarch. In this way, their partnership would continue even though death had separated them physically, and his legacy would remain alive through her ongoing work and the example she provided to future generations of the royal family.